The Doom of Mokhaiotl is an endgame boss in Old School Runescape. I want to talk about what my experience has been like doing the Doom so far. Not just the boss itself and its mechanics, but also just what it feels like. The design, the environment, the loot system, some of the pitfalls as well. And I'm very interested to talk about how this affects progression for accounts moving forward, because I think there's something here that's currently being overlooked and is going to be extremely powerful for even mid-game accounts. If I had a nickel for every single boss added with this update that was functionally immortal and just dug deeper every time the HP got lower, I'd have 2 nickels. It is not a lot of money, but it's weird that it happened twice. Not only does the Doom do this, the gemstone crab, which is right beside it, does the exact same thing. You can't actually slay the gemstone crab, it just digs away and you follow it. I don't know, I just found that really strange. Like, they must know each other, and I wanted to call that out before really getting into the video. And this is also a trend I've noticed recently with Old School, not necessarily digging away, but we don't slay and kill these bosses anymore a lot of the times. They kind of just always exist. Like, Moon's Apparel just pushes you away. I think Soul Heretic doesn't die either. There's so many cases recently, and I don't know, I found it interesting. It probably makes sense because we're sending a ton of KC. It makes sense that these things actually continue to live as opposed to them continuing to respawn. So maybe it's a conscious decision by Jagex, but I wanted to call it out. And the gemstone crab delve thing is just hilarious. The first week of doing this boss was very difficult for me, and tilting at times, definitely. Part of that was me learning to do the boss. There was definitely a learning curve here, but a large part of it was also the fact that some of the mechanics were extremely janky and very punishing. Now, it's been changed since, and now it's a lot more consistent. Previously, you'd have like situations where he could just spam boulder attacks, melee punishes non-stop, while like 3 melee grubs are going into him, and you couldn't do anything about it because you're dealing with so many boulder spams. The earthen shards, like, you could click them by accident because the hitboxes appeared before the visual. The hitbox of the boss was atrocious, especially during the charging shield phase. There are so many reasons. A lot of my deaths, beyond just learning the basic mechanics, were because of the jank. But since then, they've addressed pretty much all of it, and the boss feels a lot more consistent now. People can now send wave like 180 plus if they want to, because everything is consistent and you can deal with the mechanics fairly. The mechanics of this boss, I'd say, are pretty cool. They're not exactly unique, at least some of them. Heavily inspired by the Leviathan for sure. The boulder attack, the way it permanently impacts the ground, the fact that the projectiles are coming at you in like a Guitar Hero color way is exactly the same as Leviathan. Beyond the boulder mechanic, you have a shield mechanic where you need to hit the boss with a melee weapon or it's going to charge up a bar and you're going to take tons of damage. There's also another shield mechanic that happens at 75% HP or lower and after the orb special as well, where you have to hit the boss with a demon bay weapon while dealing with grubs coming towards the boss. The fact that they're very similar in appearance was definitely confusing at first, and I think before they made changes to the bosses, there were cases where you'd have like a melee punish get canceled into the other shield mechanic and it could be very awkward, or you might not realize that and you'll take the big hit, but now it's a lot smoother. The orb mechanic is probably the most difficult mechanic in this fight, especially in later waves where it's got 5 slams that you need to protect yourself from within the orb. Now that they've adjusted this so that you can only get basically 1 boulder special while setting it up and you're not really dealing with the melee grubs, it's actually fairly approachable and consistent. The car mechanic that starts in wave 5 is honestly the best mechanic in this fight. It is so fun to deal with for so many different reasons. Now, wave 5 I wouldn't say is particularly fun. Wave 6 plus is when you're actually dealing with the full car mechanic, and there's a lot of cool tech you can do, like putting boulders in certain spots so that it makes it very easy for you to deal with the slam by either basically nulling it or making it very easy to get to cover. I very much like that. You can deal so much damage to the boss during this phase if you're actually doing the special effectively. When you're first learning, you're not going to get a ton of damage done. You're going to be running around. You might forget to even hit the boss and take like a huge chunk of damage and die. But as you get better, you start to learn the little nuances. There's definitely patterns, like you can set up very specific tiles and basically have it completely solved. That's how it's like possible to do really, really deep dives. But just learning this mechanic was enjoyable. And honestly, I don't really enjoy doing the first 5 waves of this boss. When I get to wave 6+, that's where I start to have fun because of the amount of damage I can do during this phase. And hopefully sometimes I can take out the boss before it even does the orb special. And the thing with all these mechanics as well is that you can avoid taking damage entirely. There's a very few cases where you're kind of forced to take damage. It has to do with like really, really bad grub spawns perhaps. But generally speaking, you can take 0 damage, and that needs to be done with this boss because the whole point of the boss is that you delve deeper and deeper, and if you were taking chip damage, that becomes really annoying and honestly not as obtainable to go really deep. Now, when it comes to doing deep dives, like really, really deep dives, I definitely want to get into this more, and what's very interesting about this is that the way you do the fight when you're doing, let's say, waves just 8, 9, 10 versus if you're doing waves like 15, 20 plus is completely different. I mean, it's the same fight, but you have to do the mechanics in a different way. You have to bring different weapons and specs as well. Like this is where you start prioritizing, you know, stuff that's going to heal you, like AGS, Eldritch Orb. People are bringing that, the Nightmare Staff. Those help you get further, and because you can hit the boss with 100% accuracy, you can hit the Earth Shards with, you know, the Eldritch Orb to get prayer back. Like there's so many cool ways to keep your sustain. And I do like that there's a difference between, hey, if I only want to send up to wave 8 or so, I bring this type of gear and I focus on DPS. I bring ZCB, which is going to chunk my health here and there. Or if I want to go deeper, I start to bring a completely different gear set. Not just gear as well. The way the acid works in later waves, you can't clear it with the holy water mechanic. The only way you can clear it is with the orb special. So typically I would say if you're sending, you know, to wave 8 or so, you want to try to kill the boss before you get to the orb special because the orb special is the most dangerous. But in later waves, you actually want the orb special to happen because it's your opportunity to be a janitor, basically, and clear some of the acid out of the way, which I think is kind of unique. And it does force you to do the difficult mechanic when you're going really deep. So it's not like you're cheesing the waves necessarily by just doing max DPS. There's actually an incentive to slow down and deal with the difficult mechanics. The design of the boss is one of the cooler designs in the game. The boss itself is smaller than I thought it was going to be, but I think it makes sense considering the car mechanic and the grub mechanic. If the boss was larger, those would be more difficult to deal with. So the size works, and obviously the shield looks incredible. I want to know more about like this creature. Like, why does it have that face on its shield? Is it basically trying to protect itself from stuff that's even larger beneath us, right? Like a little bit more of the lore in the future would be cool. But generally speaking, an awesome design, and all the mechanics in the fight tie into its design, which is really cool. In terms of the environment, I really do like the environment, the fact that you're delving deeper and deeper. Now, it is funny when you're going like 190 floors deep, and like how deep is this like archive? But obviously that's, you know, we suspend our disbelief a little bit. But I do like that as you're going deeper, it does get more like scary, more grotesque, right? Darker, and that's really awesome to see. I do have one issue though with it. When you're dealing with the boulder mechanic, especially in the later waves along the edges, it can be a little bit hard to see the shadows. Now you can circumvent this by changing the floor, right, that you're in. Like people do this with TOB, with the bloat room, for example, and people do it here with Doom. I try to avoid that because aesthetically, I'm not a fan of like changing the game in that way. I do appreciate the environment, but I understand why people would do it. Like it is objectively better for doing the boss. I do take more damage because I occasionally miss a shadow due to the dark contrast. What I would suggest here, if Jagex wants to go with like these darker contrasts in some places, maybe think of more creative ways to do this like move away from tile mechanic, right? It doesn't always have to be a, you know, shadow that expands and explodes. You could maybe have done like some sort of visual thing that comes from the ground instead. Like this boss is ultimately below us, right? Like, why isn't that coming from the ground? And that would allow a little bit more room for designing something that stands out more visually, easier to see. I think in some areas shadows work because, you know, the contrast makes sense, but in darker areas, I think it's a consideration Jagex should think about when they're designing their bosses in the future. In terms of the loot itself, the demon tiers are really cool. I like it when bosses have unique resources that are from them and maybe some skilling activity near them, like we have with demon tiers. It's a way to introduce something valuable and consistent to the boss without affecting skilling in Old School Runescape as a whole. The boss does also have its standard PVM drops, and of course it has the big ticket unique items. Now, the way the system works is as you go deeper and deeper, you're going to get more and more rewards, and you have to risk those rewards to go deeper. But the thing that's a little bit off with this boss is the fact that the regular loot is very, very, very bad. Now, I don't have a problem with the uniques being the big ticket items and then not having bosses spit out tons of PVM resources. I think that's the right way to go for most bosses. However, when you have a boss that's based on a risk versus reward system, there's basically no times where I would take the regular loot, right? I'm an Iron Man, so maybe if there was like a lot of cannonballs or sunfire splinters, like, okay, I'll cash in. But generally speaking, I risk whatever's in there. I see no reason why I shouldn't just send the next wave and maybe get a unique. I don't know how Jagex can solve for this, because you don't want this boss to pump in so many PVM resources. Like, it makes sense that you don't want to do that, but at the same time, by having a system where you're never incentivized to take the regular loot, this could affect the unique prices, right? I'm sure there are a ton of people out there that said, this regular loot's not great, I'm gonna send the next wave, and then got a unique. Where if the regular loot was pretty good, they might have thought otherwise and not gotten that unique. But this loot system, I don't just want to talk about the GP and the value and all that. The loot system also impacts the way you do the fight. And it makes it feel a little awkward because you put yourself in positions where you're likely going to die while doing this boss a lot. Obviously, when you're learning the boss, right, there's a good chance you're gonna get to your gravestone a ton of times. That's acceptable, of course. What I mean though is that when I'm doing the boss, there's only a couple of outcomes where I even take the loot, right? I get a unique, I take the loot. I run out of supplies at whatever wave and I look at the loot and I say, okay, there's some decent stuff in here, I guess I'll take it. But the most likely situation I find myself in, I look at the loot, I have no more supplies, and I don't like what I see. So I send the next wave with minimal supplies or no supplies. Or maybe even I have some supplies, but I make a mistake and I die or something. But the point is that this system makes it so that I am inherently going to die at this boss more than any other boss because I see no reason why I shouldn't take advantage of that max chance to get a unique versus restarting at the earlier waves because I took like 300, 400k worth of loot. I don't want my character to die all the time, but it just makes sense. Like, I'm taking on such low risk for a chance of such really high reward. I should do that. It's gotten a little bit more tolerable as I eliminated the skill issue deaths from learning, and I suppose when I start getting consistently very deep, the regular loot should at least be acceptable when I'm out of supplies. I wonder how you guys feel about this though, because I'm sure I'm probably more of an outlier here given my perspective. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this mechanic and how it influences the way you do this boss. Obviously, this is an endgame boss that definitely requires endgame skill to be able to do, and the rewards are clearly endgame rewards. So with that being said, you think that this would be something you would do far later in an account. Well, you don't necessarily have to. The gear requirements to do this boss are actually fairly lenient. A Scorching Bow and Elite Void is surprisingly powerful, and both of those are fairly obtainable whether you're a main or an Iron Man. And when it comes to spec weapons, there are a ton of options you can bring. And to pull in the thread of low requirements further, you can bring a Crystal Halberd for the melee punish as a spec, and it is very, very strong and very easy to obtain. If you don't want to use that as a spec, you can do dual mocks as just a regular hit during melee punish and still do a good chunk of damage. Let's say you want to go more of the sustain spec instead. You can bring a blowpipe, SGS, AGS. All of those are really good. All these specs are really good because there's points in the fight where you can hit the boss with 100% accuracy or hit something else with enough accuracy that you're gonna get either a lot of damage or a lot of healing off. Now, it's nice to have a light bearer as well, which is very cheap again to get. For Iron Men, maybe this is something you've already gotten, maybe not, but it's not even necessary. Double death charge is also very nice to get. Neither of those you need, but they're nice to have, and they're still pretty low requirements. Combine this with the quest being fairly easy to do as well, like the requirements are not too steep. You can come to this boss way earlier than its difficulty or the rewards indicate you should. I like that you can do an endgame boss without needing endgame gear to do it effectively. If you can do endgame content as well, like, you deserve the rewards. However, this boss works in waves, and when you combine the waves with the lower gear requirements, it makes me a little weary for how this could affect account progression for new accounts moving forward. So let's say you're a main account, you've done a lot of PVM, you've done some raids, you've done some Doom, and now you got an Iron Man account. You've gotten a Scorching Bow and an Elite Void set. You decide to go to Doom. You send Wave 8+, and hey, look, you have access to 3 very strong rewards for your account. I don't think there's anything wrong with this inherently. Like, if you can do Wave 8+, you deserve the rewards 100%. However, the rewards don't start spawning at Wave 8+. They start spawning at Wave 2, 3, and 4+. Obviously, the drop rate is not nearly as good, but still, you have access to these very, very strong items. So let's imagine an account that's less experienced with PVM. Maybe they've done Tormented Demons, Moons of Peril, maybe some TOA as well, and now they're heading over to Doom. Well, Doom isn't going to be an endgame boss when you walk into it. It's not going to be Sonic's Nightmare and clap you out with a bunch of mechanics. It's going to be actually fairly approachable Wave 1. You're going to be able to do Wave 1. Wave 2 is like Wave 1 with 1 extra mechanic. That's how it works. There's 1 extra mechanic each time. So basically, it's very approachable, kind of like Invocations at TOA. They can slowly learn the boss more and more. And ultimately, this boss isn't an endgame boss until Wave 8+. So really, if they can practice and do guides and get to Wave like 5+, they're basically doing a mid-game boss, but getting access to end-game rewards. And that's the part that's a little bit weird for me, and it definitely makes it so that they can skip a lot of grinds as well. The Mokhaiotl Cloth, I don't have much of a problem with this one. It is very strong, and it is a best in slot. Previous best in slot comes from Tormented Gorillas, though, which is a Slayer monster. This is a boss, so I actually prefer that because best in slots should come from bosses, right? But it will make their magic a lot stronger, especially with the passive effect without a shadow, which they likely don't have. Speaking of shadow, probably the best reward here for them is the Eye of a Yak. This is such a strong magic staff. In some ways, it can beat shadow, which is incredible, but it's going to be your best staff until shadow, regardless. It's going to skip stuff like Trident and Trident of the Swamp. If they don't have 87 Slayer yet, this is going to skip both of those immediately. It's going to skip Sang technically as well, even though people don't really go for Sang. And even if you got Spoon to Shadow, you know, Shadow upkeep with Soul Runes is going to be much harder than this. And if you don't have full gear with the Shadow, it might not be as strong as this anyway. So exceptionally strong. And then the last item are the Treads. These Tribe boots are incredibly strong. They're basically like, it's a primordial boot, like in a lot of ways stronger, but just 1 less strength bonus, which is not a big deal when you combine the fact that it's got range strength, which is better than any boot you can get in the game, better than Pegasians, better than Rangers, and then it also has basically Eternal boots, a little bit better than Eternal boots as well. So it's better than any boot you can get up until Serb, better than technically 2 of the 3 Serb boots, and then when you get to Serb, you just get the boot drop and combine it to make these boots even stronger. So you're not skipping Serb, you still want the boot drops, but you are getting the power of Serb boots potentially earlier in your account than you ever would previously. So I just wanted to bring this up because I do think it's kind of interesting. I think it could really shake up the progression curve in like an awkward way. And I don't want to sound gatekeepy at all. I'm wondering what other people's thoughts are here. I would have preferred maybe if the uniques were spawning in later waves, perhaps, like maybe wave 5, 6, 7, and the drop rates were maybe a little bit better as a result. But let me know what you think. I definitely think it affects the meta though. It's a really good thing I held off on making this video because it's clear that if I did this a week or so ago, it would have been a little bit more of a negative outlook. I think since then, as I've gotten better at the boss, as metas have come up and different items you can use have surfaced, the obvious changes have been incredible for this boss. I'd say now the outlook is fairly positive in terms of actually doing the boss, outside of a few things I've mentioned already in the video related to deaths and how this affects progression. But what do you think of the boss so far? Have you been sending the Doom? I've actually gotten pretty lucky so far, and I should expect to green log him soon.